thank you all for coming to the first IMP speaker series. The idea is that we will be hosting a variety of speakers each month on various topics related to innovation and performance. And we welcome both internal city staff but also external visitors. So this is all just going to be part of our new public engagement as part of just information awareness and raising. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Grant, who will then introduce our first set of speakers, all about air quality.
Great, thanks Director Lamb, greatly appreciate it. My name is Grant Irvin. I serve as Sustainability Manager for the City of Pittsburgh and would like to welcome you all here today, as Director said, for the initial kickoff of the Innovation Speaker Series. And we're really proud to offer this up as a service, not just to city employees, but also our friends in the community, to learn about some of the work that we're doing here in the City of Pittsburgh with our partners from around the city. This is really a collaborative effort that we're bringing together today, nonprofit partners, university partners, foundations, to understand how the intersection between philanthropy, government, and the civic sector can really lead innovation here across the City of Pittsburgh. The topic today is about air quality. It's one of the biggest challenges that we face in the City of Pittsburgh in terms of our overall sustainability, in terms of both indoor and outdoor air quality. Today we've brought together a group of speakers who are really at the forefront of addressing air quality issues here in Pittsburgh, both in terms of their technical capacity, their role as advocates, and also the investments that they're making in our communities to help make Pittsburgh a more sustainable and innovative city. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the slate of speakers that we brought for our audience here today. The speakers will all have about 10-minute presentations to enlighten you about some of the work that they're providing here as partners with the City of Pittsburgh. And then we'll also follow up at the end with a series of question and answers to allow you, the audience, to get engaged, as well as answering some of the questions that you might have burning on the tip of your tongue, and also some of the issues that you might catch through some of their presentations. Each of the presenters that we're working with today are working hand in hand with the City of Pittsburgh on different collaborative projects, whether it's in the policy arena in terms of developing public policy to advance us to the next level, or from the technical standpoint. So you're going to get to learn some of the behind-the-scenes work that we're doing here in the City of Pittsburgh in terms of monitoring indoor air quality and some of the lessons that we can learn in terms of making some strategic decisions going forward. So with that, I'd like to introduce, I'll introduce our group of speakers, and we're going to start off today with Phil Johnson. Phil is the director of the Environment Program for the Heinz Endowments, probably one of the leading, if not the leading, air quality advocate here in the City of Pittsburgh. He oversees the Breathe Project, which is an initiative of the Heinz Endowments, which is really putting air quality on the map in terms of the importance of the issue, as well as some of the aspects in which we can change our behavior to improve the air quality here in Pittsburgh. Following Phil will be B. Diaz from the Create Lab, as well as Chris Bartley, her co-conspirator from the Create Lab. We're working with Carnegie Mellon's Create Lab through the deployment of the SPEC meter, which they're going to talk to you a little bit about with regards to monitoring small particulate matter, and a cool, nifty little tool that we're working on that's really starting to engage, and I have to be honest, one of the catalysts for this event, because it's quite the conversation starter once you're providing a little bit more information and people are able to visualize some of the challenges that we have with our air quality. That's going to be followed up, Chris and B will be followed up by Melissa Bilec. Melissa comes to us from the University of Pittsburgh, where we're working with the University of Pittsburgh and the Green Building Alliance, who part of their 2030 district program. We were one of their initial guinea pigs along with Allegheny County in terms of measuring indoor air quality. So we're doing some testing in our facilities and looking forward to some of the lessons that we'll be able to learn from their research and then apply it to some of our changes here that we're looking to make in terms of systems. So with that, I'd like to introduce Phil to get his kick started here. And then each speaker follow Phil, and we'll have question and answers at the end. So thanks much. Phil?
Thank you so much for the invitation. This is a nice gathering, and thank you for dimming the lights or turning off the lights. That helps even more, because I'm going to show a bunch of visuals today and some data, and hopefully also provide some inspiration. So in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to fly through a bunch of slides, talk a little quickly. Happy to handle any questions or discussion points in the aftermath if there's time. So we're looking here at the Breathe Cam. We have 4 of these spread across panoramic views of Pittsburgh. This is a day, a big day, July 4th of last year. Fine particulate matter was quite low at 6. And then you can see the contrast when particles just a few days before that were at 35. You can see how the city is very much dirtier, even at a level that is within the 24-hour average on that day was less than 35, and 35 is the daily standard for fine particulate matter. Here's a view looking to the north. You can see a day where particles are fairly low, 4, April 16th. And here's a day where April 6th, 10 days previous, particles were at 24. You lose the horizon. It's basically gone. If that were a mountain range, I think Pittsburghers would take this issue more seriously in terms of visibility, at least, because they wouldn't see their mountains. So Grant gave me instructions what to talk about, and I liked his sentence so much I just cut and pasted it right into the title. What is the status of air quality? And what I really liked is when he asked me, what happens outside influences what goes on inside? Can I talk about that? And so I see at least 2 things in there. First is what happens outside my body affects what's inside my body. That's the health impacts. And then, of course, what happens outdoors affects what's going on inside where humans dwell. So I'll make the case and try and show the data to support these arguments, and we'll see where it goes. So just a very quick primer on how such microscopic, tiny airborne things called fine particulate matter can have such a pronounced health impact on humans across large populations. So this is a picture of a tree in Central Park. I turned it upside down because it essentially looks exactly like a human lung. You have the trachea or the trunk, you have the bronchial or the branching, the alveoli, which if they were really filled out in a lung, you wouldn't even see any leaf definition. But the leaf activity would be the tips of this organism, and this is where the exchange occurs, the atmospheric exchange. The thing is that the air that goes into our lungs is chemically active, and it exerts through different biological mechanics pronounced health outcomes in humans. So if there's a take-home from that last slide, is particles are tiny. They're about 1/30th the width of a human hair. Because we inhale airborne particles, we're basically looking at huge absorption by the body. If you stretched out the lung, it would be, in an adult, it would be about, the tissue would be about the surface area of a badminton court. So that skin would be about maybe 2 meters squared. The lung on average could be about 78 meters squared, which is a badminton court. Toxic, these particles have absorbed toxic chemicals and other materials on them, including biologicals. And we know that air particle exposures in certain time durations, and surprisingly not long ones, but also chronic durations can kill people. At least 40 to 50% of the population in the United States is susceptible to health outcomes from air quality, from air pollution, especially pregnant children, persons with lung or heart disease, diabetics, and the elderly. Anyone experiencing elevated exposures, there actually is no safe level of exposure per se because it's a non-threshold pollutant. There's no level at which we've been able to measure statistically that has not been associated with adverse health outcomes. According to the recent Global Burden of Disease study, in the United States, fine particles are responsible for 12% of ischemic heart disease death per year, 10% stroke death, 6% lung cancer death, and 5% of COPD death. So this is a pretty serious contaminant, even at today's levels. When we look at fine particles into ozone, we're looking at estimates of over 100,000 premature mortalities per year, nearly 200,000 fatal acute myocardial infarctions, so that's a heart pathway, tens of thousands of hospitalizations and emergency room visits, hundreds of thousands of cases of acute bronchitis. This is an EPA estimate. We know that historically higher levels of air pollution killed people. This is the famous event in London, 1952, where you have deaths here and you have a peak in smoke right below it. So how is it that we could have over 100,000 Americans today perishing from air pollution? Well, when you look at this concentration response curve, you have micrograms of particles from high to low. And then you have a relative risk scale, which is basically looking at the risk of an adverse health outcome on the vertical axis, and it's above 1. So today we're in here, and we're above a 1.0 risk. So when you add all this up, that's where you get these tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of events because it's a population scale threat. Well, how can that be? It's a small individual risk, but the problem is it's a high prevalence of population exposure, so you have a magnitude of risk which is high. That's because everyone breathes. Pollution in our country is synoptic and ubiquitous. It's almost everywhere, and it moves in large patterns. And so hence you have these magnified impacts, which are population scale. That's why we get these big public health burdens. Buildings breathe as well. Humans are indoors the majority of their day. We know that to be true. So how is it that all these ambient air measurements are correlated statistically with adverse outcomes in humans? Well, it's because the building envelope does not always provide an effective barrier from outdoor pollutants. Buildings breathe just as we do. They're breathing in pollutants from the outside, and also in some buildings, they're generating pollutants on the inside. And so when you look at our personal exposure, that's where you can get a better sense of the epidemiology as to how the ambient portion of air pollution affects humans. And so hence, these outdoor studies of ambient air are highly relevant to assessment of indoor environmental health risks. There are many studies that have looked at this. This one from Seattle found that 79% of the indoor particulate matter in houses in Seattle came from outdoor generated particles. So the majority of the pollution came from the outside in their houses. The range was 40 to 100%. Another Seattle study found that among indoor populations, only the outdoor particles were significantly associated with markers of airway inflammation in asthmatic children in Seattle. That's incredible to think about. We've been looking at this issue in a transdisciplinary way over the past year with our Ruckus Initiative, reducing outdoor contaminants in indoor spaces, and I see a lot of familiar faces in this room who've gone to our 3 forums. We have white papers, and we're doing demonstration projects. The website is ruckus.org. And just to kind of wrap up this portion of the slideshow, and then I'll move on, consider what happened in Utah in the 1980s. So here's a plot, kind of like a little simple bar graph. On the left axis, you have a dual scale of micrograms per cubic meter of air pollution, particulate matter 10, and admissions for bronchitis, asthma, and pneumonia. And you have three different winters, 85, 86, 86, 87, 87, 88, for each of these 3 categories. So you see that the particles are quite high for each of these 3 winters. Then the particles go down. Why? Because a steel mill closed. It stopped working. Particles went down. And the bronchitis went down. And the pneumonia went down. And then the steel mill turned back on again. And everything went up. So were the children outside the whole time? Of course not. They were in schools and houses, just like our children are. I don't think they were in a LEED certified office building at that time, which may have had cleaner air, because their homes and their schools certainly were probably where they were spending most of their time, and this ambient air pollution resulted in these outcomes. But it's not just indoor air pollution or that migration, it's also outdoors. So big cohort studies, one in Southern California looked at over 3,500 children. Time spent outside, they used team sports as a measure, was higher incidence of asthma in communities with high ozone compared to communities of low ozone for children in 2 or 3 team sports. I flew into LA not too long ago, and I took this picture from the airplane, and here are the mountains that I should have seen from a postcard that I got at the airport. And you can see the inversion. Up here is blue sky. And I was like, I wonder oh, and just so you know, for grounding, Los Angeles has much worse ozone than we have. We're in non-attainment for ozone 2. But they're not much worse than we are for fine particles. So we're really in their rank. And this was a high particle day when I flew in. There was no ozone. So I mapped it using an EPA tool, and I found that they were actually just at the turning point of yellow. They were at 52. And just so you know, we had 240 days in 2013 in Pittsburgh that were yellow or worse. That's 65% of that year. And so, you know, we like to say we're not hell anymore, and we used to be hell with the lid off. And Hieronymus Bosch, I love his version of hell because I think this person might be trying to breathe. I don't know if that's what he was thinking, but that's what I think about when I look at that painting. And so Arden Pope, who did the steel mill studies with the Utah plot that I just showed you, He spoke in Pittsburgh not long ago, recently. He said, Pittsburgh has come a long way, but boy, has it got a ways to go. What did he mean by that? Well, what he meant was, first of all, we know statistically in positive associations, we have over 32 different journal papers showing that we have positive and statistical significance for excess mortality, disease, and adverse reproductive outcomes associated with fine particulate matter and ozone in our contemporary air. These studies were counted up since 1970, and there's actually more that have been published since this data dump was done in 2012-13. So these are the different outcomes that that epidemiologists have measured in Pittsburgh or in studies that included Pittsburgh's air. ASD was published last summer, and there's going to be another publication from Dr. Talbot's team soon. Dr. Pope was referring to how you look at we're in the worst 13% of the United States for fine particulate matter, looking across our monitors. And compared to this part of the United States, one of the most densely populated portions of the United States in the country, New York City, New Jersey, parts of New Jersey, Long Island, they're at 41%. That means they're much cleaner than we are. They're still not good, but they're much better. Boston is at 74%, so they're in the upper 25, 26% cleanest cities in the country. Philadelphia is a little better than us. They're at 29%. Cleveland is a little better than us. Bakersfield, California is the worst 1%, so we've got something going there. We're beating Bakersfield. If you look at attainment with the fine particulate matter standard, basically the only counties in the country that aren't yet in attainment with the standard are blue. So 95% of the country is in attainment, and of that percent, 50% reached attainment 10 years ago. If you look at air toxics, this is from a 2005 data set that was reconstituted to include conservatively what 2000 levels would be with respect to two of our largest air toxic sources. In addition to diesel, that would be coke oven emissions. And all these red bars are Pittsburgh area codes, 10 county area. This here is very high cancer risk. This is lower cancer risk from airborne toxics. This is the rest of the country. These are our 10 counties in southwestern Pennsylvania. This is a bimodal curve, and you don't want to be in this part of the bimodal curve. That's where we are. A myth, most of our pollution comes from Ohio. Actually, most of it's indigenous. 34 to 54% of Allegheny County's pollution comes from Allegheny County. If you look out and include all the Pennsylvania sources that blow in over Allegheny County, you jump up to a max of 66%. So we can do something about that. Another myth is we have only one dirty monitor in a valley south of Pittsburgh. That's our only problem. Well, actually, most of our particle monitors are the dirtiest in the country. In fact, 3 of 11 are in the worst decile, 7 of the 10 of our PM25 monitors are in the worst quarter, and 10 of 11 are in the worst third. There's really no clean place you can find in Pittsburgh relative to the rest of the country. Air toxics, looking at the 2005 data set, which is going to be updated soon, hopefully, we're in the worst 2% of counties for air toxics in the country. Now, a lot of urban counties have poor air pollution, have high levels of air toxics. We're not too unique there. But for our size, we're pretty unique. And also, if you just look at industrial point sources, we're in the worst 0.2% air toxics in our area, according to EPA data estimates. And that's a risk function. Another myth is, well, you know, we have valleys and river valleys and inversions which trap the pollution. That's why we have a pollution problem. And well, I mean, yeah, that's half true. And then the other half of that truth is that valleys and inversions with no pollution, they don't have pollution because there's no pollution there to get trapped in an inversion. So you look at this CMU 3-year data set. This was their domain of study. They did saturated sampling for three and a half years, looking at black carbon, which is a particularly insidious component of fine PM2.5. And these are all the black carbon hotspots, and you can see they're our river valleys are heavily burdened with air pollution. And that's because we have a lot of sources in our river valleys, and the river valleys are prone to inversions. So this kind of slide is quite sobering because it tells us that some of the most precious environmental assets and developmental and economic and recreational assets are among the most contaminated river areas in the country, and we have to live with that. We know that the minute we start reducing these contaminants and start improving our source emissions profiles, that we get immediate public health benefits. In fact, of all the government programs, studies have shown that EPA's clean air programs have the largest payback of any investment the government has done, 30-to-1 central tendency ratio paybacks. So for every dollar spent, we get $30 saved by reducing and avoiding heart attacks, respiratory problems, and lost work days and lost school days. So these solutions are all around us. This is pretty simple stuff in some ways. We just reduce the sources, the problem starts to go away. European Commission did an analysis. If they spend $3.4 billion for pollution abatement, they get 12 times higher savings of at least $40 billion a year through decreased disease and healthcare costs and increased working productivity. Those are current numbers. So finally, CMU's black carbon study, and they've mapped out other pollutants as well. They concluded the river valleys are among the most polluted areas in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County. And so, sure, this is no longer what we're about, but what we have to focus on, I think, is that same kind of pride and passion and commitment we have to our icons, like our sports and our art and culture. What percentile do we want to be in? Do we want to be in the worst 13 percentile, or do we want to be in the upper quartile? That's really the question I'll leave you with today. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, my name is Bea and this is Chris. We're from the Create Lab at Carnegie Mellon University. And we're going to talk about exploring our air quality. I think Phil Price gave us all a bleak overview of what the air quality is like in Pittsburgh, and it's overwhelming, and oftentimes you can feel disempowered to fix anything. How can we fix the problem? How can we breathe easier? And we developed SPEC, which we're going to talk about and show you a little demo to kind of address that disempowerment or feeling of disempowerment, hopefully. So I want to give you a little background about the CREATE Lab. CREATE stands for Community Robotics Education and Technology Empowerment. And it's a really long acronym, but we do try to hit all of those terms. We really care about creating a technology that has meaningful impact and sustainable impact in the community. And we do it through educational efforts and also through citizen science empowerment and scientist empowerment. And one of those projects is the SPEC Air Quality Monitor. This is a low-cost device. We just spun off a company to sell them commercially so that we could provide more access to it. We've been developing it SPEC for about 4 years now, and it started out from an offshoot from another project. But the idea was to give people access to an instrument that can give them information about their air quality indoors. Outside, you have a lot of federal monitors that you can look up online through airnow.gov, but there are a lot of things that happen inside, and as Phil mentioned, a lot of the outdoor air pollutants get inside your home too, and we spend the majority of time inside our homes. So how can we understand what's going on inside our homes in terms of these invisible particles? And so the SPEC gives you a sense of what those are. And you'll see in the screen here, it's still running, gives you a nice indication. This is the number of particles, this is the particle concentration, and it's in kind of the good range level. And the idea is not to scare people off, but to give you information so that you can make informed decisions about what to do to improve the air quality in your home or your office or wherever you put it. The SPEC, inside the SPEC, there's an optical sensor. It's a very cheap, low-cost sensor, and what it does on the side, there's a fan that's constantly running, and below there's an air intake. So the fan is creating a constant vacuum inside the SPEC, and it's pulling air through the sensor. And as the air particles travel through the sensor, depending on how the light is refracted from the optical sensor, it detects the particles and does a count. And it's most sensitive to the PM2.5, the fine particulate range. So that's what we focused on. And those particles are most important because they have significant health impacts. So by giving you access to this information, the goal is to empower folks to then take this information and do something about it to improve their air quality. And we focus on indoors to start with because indoors you can do a lot actually to improve your air quality and breathe easier, whereas outdoors it takes a lot more effort and more longer-term efforts to make impact in the outdoor air quality. So we focused on indoors to start with. I'm not going to go over this slide since Phil gave you a nice background information about PM2.5, but there are a variety of sources that influence the PM2.5 levels indoors. and they're 1/30th the size of a hair, human hair, so they're really tiny. You can't see them with the naked eye, and they can lodge deep in your lungs. So what can you do once you see your SPEC value? So we have kind of 4 steps that you can take. First is to establish a baseline. Set up the SPEC or whatever instrument you're using, and look at it for a week. How does your home or office behave? What are the numbers? Kind of, instead of reacting to the numbers, just pay attention to what's happening. How are the things that you're doing around it affecting the number? You'll notice that if you were looking at the screen when we walked in, the SPEC numbers rose up because a lot of people were walking on the carpet and dust was kicking up, but it's now settled down to a good level. So, pay attention to how it's changing. Move it from room to room. Investigate, was your kitchen worse than your bedroom? Is the bedroom really bad? Is your child's room bad? And identify those hotspots and when they occur. And the context is really important. So if you see really high spikes during the nighttime when everybody's sleeping and there shouldn't be any activity influence in the SPEC numbers, then you might think, well, maybe there's something more pervasive. For example, in my house, actually, we saw a really high spike for a while, and we couldn't really figure it out. We tried investigating, and to no avail, couldn't find the source, and it was spiking when we were out of the house during the day. And then the water heater guy came to check on the heater, just on maintenance, and because we had seen the spike, my husband asked him, well, can you check the gas, because we saw the spike. And sure enough, we had a small gas leak. And we wouldn't have known to ask him that if we hadn't seen the spike on the spec. So it was nice. It was minimal. It wasn't a major issue, but it was really easy to fix. So some combustion from that gas leak was impacting the spec reading. So it's things like that that make you wonder, well, what's going on in my home? And you wouldn't know it if you didn't have something to give you that information. And then you really have to become investigative and experiment with things. I have another story from my house, is the range hood over my stove. So I looked at the research. It says, run that fan before you start cooking, and that's supposed to be good. I tried it. It was terrible. It made the air quality worse when I just even turned the fan on. So then I did more investigation. I realized, okay, one, I haven't cleaned those filters in 5 years since we bought the house, so it's gross. So obviously it's getting worse when I turn that thing on. And 2, the air was just venting to the ceiling and going up to my child's bedroom. So it wasn't really taking the bad air out. It was just sending it upstairs. So we created a air tunnel where we opened the basement door, opened the kitchen window, and the upstairs window, kind of just to tunnel the air out, and that was better airflow than the fan, so I just don't use it anymore. So it's kind of discoveries like that you can only do by trial and error and trying to figure things out. And I like the term, you become an air quality detective in your home or in your office and really try to figure that out. Some easy things to try to start with is opening and closing the windows, using an air purifier to improve the air quality in a specific room if you have that. If you're in an office building, identify the hotspots. Is the bottom floor doing worse than the top floors? So then do we triage that problem? Do we send people who have respiratory issues or heart issues, do we send them to the upper floor so they're protected from the bad air, at least in the short term? And then how do we address the problem long term? What is the issue? That was a nice story from the Storrock School in Pittsburgh, where this teacher, he and his students are having a lot of symptoms. They were coughing, and they were wondering what was going on because it wasn't something that they had seen before. So they did some investigation. They actually borrowed some specs, and the specs were off the charts. But they did notice a pattern. They saw it spiked to actually the highest level at that time for that prototype of spec, and then it was kind of a sawtooth graph. It spiked, stayed high for a while, went down, spiked, etc. So they realized it was some type of pattern, and every time it spiked, they had the symptoms. So they investigated. They looked for around the school. They got access to the roof of the building, and they found a diesel generator there that was powering a cell phone tower. And every time the generator kicked on, all the emissions from that generator were directly near the air intake for that classroom. So that's why they were having the symptoms. So they found the source. they were able to show the data to the school and get rid of the generators. So they were able to literally breathe easier after that. So you can do a lot of things, and hopefully your home, for the most part, my home is fine, and kind of gives me peace of mind knowing that it's fine and that the forced air system works fine. And if I have to change the filter, it might alert me because the numbers spike when I'm not doing anything. So that's the kind of information we want to provide to people, so that they have some information about these invisible particles that are around them and can take action to really improve their life and quality of life. And I'm going to pass it on to Chris to talk about really the data side of things. One thing we always get is, can I download my data of the spec and how can I analyze it? And we try to make that easier, and we really want the data to belong to you, the user of the spec, as opposed to kind of using the data, doing analytics and telling you, do X, Y, Z to make your air better. But it really want to have the power in the hands of the consumer or the user of the spec. So I'll let Chris talk about that.
Great,
I
thanks.
think you have to scoot over to the mic.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the mandatory cloud diagram for from the software guy. So this part's probably going to be a little bit boring, but so B showed screenshots of specsensor.com. So just a really brief overview of how it works. So the website is really, it sits on top of a data repository that we created. It's open source, it's free to use. So it's environmental sensor data repository. We call it Esther because that's a mouthful. So that's basically the architecture there. And so a spec, when it's connected to your Wi-Fi, it'll be uploading its data at whatever interval you have it sampling. So typically every minute, it'll be uploading to Esther, and then it's all visible through your account on specsensor.com. But the idea is, it's not just your spec, it's everybody's spec, and anybody who has decided to make their spec information public, it'll be visible to everyone else on specsensor.com. But it's not just specs, it's Create Lab, we're also mirroring all of ACHD's air quality data into Esther, and also the 2,000 plus AirNow federal sensors all over the country, also into Esther. We have other devices that we developed in the lab. There's one that's a water quality monitor for the home called Catfish. That's going into Esther. And so then, since Esther is the data repository, we have other sites that are now using it. So catfish.com, EPA is about to start using it for their ReadyGo tool. BreatheCam is already using it for displaying the plots of values. But the idea is that since it's open, anybody can create, anybody technically minded can create their own mashup. So they might want to mix water quality data with air quality data, and maybe throw in some wind data as well, or whatever. So that's the really geeky part. So I think probably most interesting is to show you the site itself. This is it. So I'm logged in. Yeah. So the spec is online. It's uploading right now. We'll go to the past hour. So this is, I don't know what the spike it was here, whether it was maybe.
I think it's when we all came in.
Oh, maybe so,
and
yeah.
You had it kind of on your arm too. So
Right.
That does,
Yeah, so.
You got a dusty
Yeah,
shirt
so
on.
this is the unit. So it should be roughly around 10. I don't know what it's reading now.
Yeah,
so
it's 10.
do you want to get out the pillow of doom?
We brought a really gross pillow from our lab, which we used to sit next to until we realized it was so gross. But I'm gonna dust it near the spec and see what happens. Don't breathe. Yeah, there it goes.
Doing anything?
Yeah. It hates the pillow. I'm not gonna dust it too much because I'll start coughing.
Yeah.
But you can see
So,
kind of you get instantaneous
starting to go up.
feedback from the spec. So sometimes you might be dusting your sheet and it goes up, so you don't want to run out of the house for that. You realize, okay, it's just me dusting something. Plus, you'll notice that if it's heavier particles like the big dust mites or pet dander, they'll settle in the air faster because they're heavier. So you'll see a spike, but it should go down fairly fast. So that's a little less alarming.
Yeah. So we should see. Oh, sorry. Can't work the scroll wheel on this PC. Sorry.
He's a Mac guy.
Yeah.
We
But
also-
anyway, you can kind of see
yeah.
the spike right there. This one's sampling every 5 seconds. That's why you're already seeing values.
Yeah. We also, and on the newer version of spec, which is with this is one of them, you can tap to change the counts versus weight-based measures. So
Right.
that's something we implemented recently to give you both.
So probably units you're looking at. Yeah.
Yeah.
So B mentioned the discovery and investigation. I have another story. This is a personal story too. So I have 2 specs running in our laundry room in the basement, and I haven't going since Thanksgiving or so. So I have lots and lots of data. And most of it's kind of boring because we're usually not downstairs doing much. You can see these spikes. This is when we're actually doing laundry and clean out the dryer vent, and it gets dusty in there. But back in February, we had new windows installed in the house, and so I'll zoom out. Yeah, so that's this spike right here. Part of the, well, you can see that it's tall. I don't really need to zoom in on it. So the window guys, they'd been there both the day before and so this is February 10th and 11th. So this is on the 11th. One of the windows is a glass block window. They had to chip out all the mortar, and my wife, I wasn't there. My wife said there was dust everywhere, and sure enough, this was upstairs. And so the specs down in the basement, because we had central heat running, it took all the dust out of there and circulated all throughout the entire house, and it was a disaster. Yeah, she said she was, mopping and dusting the entire day. So, lesson learned, maybe seal off the room, or, don't run your central air while you have really dusty construction going on. So I wish I'd known that beforehand, yeah. So that's probably it for as far as demo goes.
Yeah, that's our little demo.
Yeah.
And our gross pillow.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're happy to take questions later on, and feel free to come up and play around with the spec and ask questions. I know there are a few monitors in this building to the older version, so I have to answer questions.
Great, thanks.
So I'm Melissa Billick. I'm from the University of Pittsburgh in the Mascaro Center, and I'm also presenting on behalf of Dr. Collins, who's a postdoc that works with me, and my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Aurora Sherrard. How many people have heard of the 2030 district? So a good number of you have, and we have 2 districts now, downtown and Oakland. And I pulled some of these really great slides from Architecture 2030, and I feel like this is super inspirational to me, so maybe it will be for you as well. And so this is as of 2010. The total U.S. Building stock is approximately 275 million square feet. And during normal economic times, we tear down approximately 1.75 billion square feet of buildings each year. We also renovate approximately 5 billion square feet. And every year we build new approximately 5 billion square feet. And so by the year 2030, we really have kind of this whole new building stock, almost 75%. And this really represents an opportunity for us to think about the spaces that we're building now, and also the air quality within those spaces, and the ambient air quality that the materials used to create those spaces are also creating. So what is a 2030 district? So the first time I heard this, I seriously thought of the Hunger Games, and I don't know if anyone else thought of that, but this is not about the Hunger Games. It's actually a much more kind of, I think in many ways, a healthy way to think about energy conservation at the district level. And one of the reasons why I was so kind of enamored with the idea of the 2030 district is it is voluntary. So the idea is that people are committing to do this, and they're signing a commitment, but it is a voluntary basis, which I think is a really unique thing about this region, that we are voluntarily doing this. And so there are different targets. So there's targets for both new buildings and major renovations, and then there's targets for existing buildings. And so you can see by the year 2030, the overall goal is to really reach carbon neutrality, which is an ambitious target. And part of what makes the Pittsburgh 2030 district unique is the idea that we want to think about not only the energy reduction at the district level, but also what we can do in terms of the indoor air quality of the buildings in the 2030 district. So, for example, we don't want to say, we're going to make these really tight buildings and then decrease the indoor air quality in the spaces. So we have to keep that in mind as we work towards these aggressive goals.
And the 2030 district has been really successful, and that's been a major effort by the Green Building Alliance with Mike Saylor and with Aurora. And this shows in green the number of signed buildings, so the people that have committed to the 2030 district. This also shows Oakland, and so this is one of the new districts that came online as well. And so the numbers are pretty staggering, right? 415 properties, and 68% of the Pittsburgh 2030 district, they've committed to this. So this is almost 65 million square feet of property. So it's a really great kind of initial commitment. And so this is done, again, not through this command and control thing, but it's done through partnership and collaboration. And it's done with property partners, community partners, research partners, and the Green Building Alliance and their stakeholders. And so one of the first things that the GBA did was to create a baseline. And the baseline really would then allow us to see if we were reaching targets. So this is the 2013 progress report, and I'm sure the new progress report is coming out very shortly. And it shows us, you know, initially that we are on target. So it'll be interesting to see next year, you know, are we at the same level, or are we growing, or are we decreasing? So I'll be looking forward to that as well. So what does this mean for you? So the district sounds really great, but what does this mean for you? So we spend, so as they mentioned, we spend 90% of our time inside of our buildings. And really what I'm interested is thinking about, you know, are we considering the entire environmental life cycle of our decisions, and are we creating these unintended consequences? And overall, I'm really interested personally in my research and the research at the Mascaro Center is to think about the environmental performance of buildings while connecting the occupants to this environment in a more thoughtful manner. And so I've spent a lot of time thinking about, you know, talking about what is the 2030 district. But when we think about the overall energy reductions that we may be making at the district level, then we have to think about, you know, what then are we doing also for the reductions in the ambient air quality, and then how does that impact our indoor air quality? So we're really centered on answering the question, using the systems level approach, how does the 2030 district impact our indoor air quality? And so this is difficult to do. This is a really not an easy thing to undertake. And this is just another reminder that our air quality is poor. And so then we start to say, how do we even begin to tackle this study? And we have so many different variables. We have building types, we have HVAC systems, we have seasonal impacts, we have multi-year study, we have all these different building uses that change over time. And essentially we come down to this idea, like, is this a wicked problem? Is this something that we can even solve? And you know, the reality is we have to measure what matters, right? If we don't do these measurements and we don't take an opportunity while the 2030 district is beginning, it's a missed opportunity. And if you look at some of the solutions for these wicked problems, the 2030 district really comes into play. One of the solutions is coming up with collaborative solutions, and that's really what the district represents. So we have 4 different pilot buildings participating. One of the buildings was this building. We actually completed the initial testing 2 weeks ago, and we're going to meet with Grant and with Afton to review those results. And we have our little cart, which I love. And so some of you may have seen this cart throughout the building, but we're testing for particulates, also total VOCs, carbon dioxide, so on and so forth. And we're using Gray Wolf. There's a lot of different types of equipment, and we also have the spec meter on the cart as well. The testing protocol that we're mainly following is one that was established by the Environmental Protection Agency in their base study. And so that's kind of like the backbone of what we're doing. And again, this is what we are testing for. And this is just an example of one of the pilot buildings. So what we're doing is we're doing the testing, and then afterwards we're meeting with the representatives of the buildings, and we are working with them to identify the locations and what the test results mean. So for example, what we have here is the different locations that we tested in the buildings, and then I also included some pictures just to kind of ground you in, you know, what is that location. So one of the locations happens to be, you know, the plotter room, which we know has some issues. So Then we'll meet with the different building owners and the people that we're working with and go over the different results. So I'm just going to show you the particulate matter results, the PM 2.5 and PM 10. And so so this again is kind of the map of what we were doing and where we were doing the testing at. The orange is what we test the results of the testing, and PM10 is the guideline. That term is used pretty loosely, but it's really just to kind of show you where you stand right now. And then also PM 2.5 is in green, and then the 2.5 guideline is there as well. So these readings suggest that in the one location 5-1, we should definitely need to do different testings. And the present filtration in the HVAC system is likely ineffective because the supply air and the return air samples at the air handling units were nearly identical. Okay, so that basically tells you that the filtration systems are not working. And then, you know, we're trying to discern, is this from indoor pollutants or from outdoor pollutants? So in this particular case, there were lower nighttime levels that may indicate mainly indoor occupant-related sources and lower outdoor PM at night. And so this is another kind of set of data that we were able to kind of show. And again, we're looking for feedback on what would be helpful for the users of the building. So one thing was good. We went into a data center and it was low PM, so that's a good finding. And typically there's a constant recirculation with good filtration. But we did see like higher PM10 in certain locations as well. And so we're working with the team there to talk about how to potentially address those. And then the next step is really to meet finally with them and to come up with some recommendations. And what we're finding when we're doing this is it raises level of awareness, and it also provides people that really want to make change additional data so they can make that change. A lot of times people really want to do that, but they just don't have the information in order to do that. And so one of the things that we came up with, and these may seem kind of obvious, but the cleaning was a really big issue. The areas needed to be cleaned, and that will hopefully help the folks to make that happen and improve the air quality in the different locations. So we're talking about routine maintenance, and then we're also going to break it up into building upgrades as well. Okay, so I don't know if you guys saw this picture recently, but it was a little diversion, but I thought it was a really cool picture. It was when there was a big rainstorm, and this takes us outside of air and into water, but I gave the results for one building, so now when you think about I think there's over 400, right? What does this mean? Like, now what? And so what we're starting to do is to think about how we can start to make meaningful recommendations at the district level. And so these are like aggregated average findings. And so it might be a little bit difficult to kind of discern what these two figures mean. But the figure on the top is really talking about, what is happening with the filtration system on average in these buildings. And so you can see the bars in the yellow and the bars in the orange. And some locations, which makes sense for some of the smaller ones, they're essentially the same. So again, the filtration systems aren't working. But the good news is down here, is when we looked at the buildings with the higher level of filtration, so some of them had up to a MERV 14, they were working. So again, that starts to give the idea that your peer buildings, these are working, and the filtration systems in place really do make a difference, and it again gives you the kind of ammunition to move forward. So moving forward, how are we going to think about this, and how are we going to move the indoor air quality baseline and metrics that we're doing for the 2030 district? And so my aim kind of at this point, and it's evolving, is really to kind of create this collaborative and quantitative model that helps the 2030 buildings and occupants and does it in a collaborative way that's meaningful and builds awareness for the folks in the buildings. So here's all of our contact information, and thank you.
Okay, great. We'd like to thank all our speakers. We'll give them another round of applause, maybe. So you've been able to see kind of the scale of the challenge we have, some of the innovation that is occurring currently here within the city of Pittsburgh with our partners from Carnegie Mellon, the Green Building Alliance, the Heinz Endowments, and the University of Pittsburgh. So we thank you for your efforts and your assistance. Do we have any questions from the audience? Maybe take a few questions here, issues that piqued your interest.
How much is the spec? Is
So
it
what-
available for anybody?
Maybe for our television audience, maybe if all the speakers can come on up here and we can share the microphone for the moment. So the question was, how much is the spec meter?
Yes. The spec is $200 plus shipping and tax, and you can purchase online, specsensor.com. And online also, I would encourage you to type in your zip code, and you can check out what your air quality is in your area too. So that way you'll know, for example, whether you should open the window or keep it closed. So.
Great. Others? Kathy?
How many buildings so far have you tested, Melissa?
3.
And have you seen differences in each of those buildings, or are they kind of a standard data set?
No, we have seen differences right now. So, hopefully moving forward, we'll be able to start to categorize different buildings and classifications and then start to parse out the data using advanced statistical techniques.
And the types of buildings, are they all commercial, industrial, residential?
They're all commercial.
They're all commercial. Okay. Great.
Is the monitoring of the specs that you have in the city available to the public?
That's a question for you. Are you going to make that data public?
So the information that we're collecting here in the city? For the
Yeah.
city facilities?
Yeah, don't you have them throughout the city, just
Not
set up
yet.
monitoring, what you were showing on your slides?
No, not yet. Not yet. Not yet. We need to replace the ones that Grant has with the Wi-Fi spec, so that'll be easier to do eventually. If you
New
want to
tech-
make it publicly
new
facing,
technology, yeah.
that would be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, just from a city standpoint, yeah, we would be happy to share that information. I mean, one of the opportunities that we've had internally, we've deployed, and I'm going to look to Afton, we've deployed here on the 6th floor, the 5th floor, and so far just on 5 and 6. So we have 2 monitors right now, and really it's been an exercise from an employee engagement opportunity just to see, oh, we have a 10 today, and it's a 15 tomorrow, and what happened, and so it started to create some visibility. Our goal is to help to expand the number of specs that we have in terms of the different office spaces, so we can get more readings and have kind of a richer data set. And we would be happy to share that information as it becomes available.
You can also check out a spec from the library in Squirrel Hill. They're usually checked up, and hopefully you might get one. And we're hoping to put more in the library system eventually.
So they're
by this
available
summer.
to the general public
Correct.
then?
Yeah.
Great.
Just with your library card. Yeah.
So did I understand you had 2 floors in this building that you were?
2 floors.
6th and 5th?
Currently, yeah. So when you leave the innovation and performance space here from the presentation, you can go right around the corner and you can see this one spec that we've deployed here on 6. And then if you go to the front counter in the city council offices, we also have one deployed there.
Are you interested in any other floors? I'll tell you what, we are closer to street level,
Mm-hmm.
and we actually face out onto the street.
Sure.
And the precipitate, let's say, the particles that you can wipe from the surfaces
Mhm.
every morning
Every
Sure.
morning.
are quite alarming. And I think it would be rather interesting
Yeah.
if you guys wanted to see some extremes, you could get them there.
Yeah.
So yes, the answer to your question is yes, we would look forward to displaying and deploying more spec meters on other floors. Great, some great questions. Once again, thank you to all our speakers. We greatly appreciate your leadership and the information that you've been able to bring to us today. I'd also like to thank all of you, our audience, fellow city employees, our nonprofit partners, our university partners, and all of our neighbors here. And also like to give special thanks to our administrative team that helped pull this together, as well as the Pittsburgh Cable Channel and their fine work for producing this event for us here today. So thank you all again, and this was our first inaugural Innovation and Performance lecture series. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.